The gavel slammed. "Order in the court!" The judge's voice dripped with sarcasm as he peered over his glasses. His gaze landed on a young black girl in the front row, barely looking older than a high school student, clutching a notebook like it was armor. "Miss," the judge sneered, "this is a courtroom, not a playground. Shouldn't you be studying for your exams instead of pretending to be a lawyer?" Laughter erupted from the gallery. Whispers spread like wildfire. The girl's cheeks burned, but her eyes never wavered. She stood, her voice trembling at first, then sharpening like steel. What no one in that room knew, not the judge, not the jury, not even the opposing counsel, was that this teenager wasn't a student at all. She was a licensed attorney, a prodigy, a genius who had passed the bar years earlier, and she was about to prove them all wrong. Before the trial, before the mocking laughter and the gavel's sting, there was just Aaliyah Carter, a young black girl who never seemed to fit the mold the world built for her. On the outside, she looked like any teenager from the neighborhood, sneakers laced tight, hair pulled back into neat braids, and a backpack that always seemed heavier than her shoulders could carry. Teachers whispered about her. Strangers doubted her. Even friends sometimes struggled to keep up. Because Aaliyah wasn't just smart, she was extraordinary. By 14, she had already burned through high school material. By 16, she was sitting in college lecture halls, where classmates twice her age blinked in disbelief as she raised her hand with answers professors themselves sometimes stumbled on. While other kids her age were figuring out prom dates and driver's licenses, Aaliyah was buried in constitutional law and civil rights history. She didn't just want to learn the law, she wanted to master it. Why? Because she had seen what injustice looked like up close. She had seen neighbors profiled, classmates suspended for things others got away with, relatives pulled over and spoken to like criminals for no reason other than the color of their skin. From the beginning, she knew she wasn't just chasing a career. She was arming herself with knowledge, preparing for battles she hadn't even fought yet. Her mother, Denise, often worried. "Baby, you don't owe the world every ounce of yourself," she would say, setting a plate of food in front of Aaliyah after long study nights. But Aaliyah would just smile. "If I don't, who will, Mom?" Her father, Marcus, a retired teacher, saw the fire in her. He knew the world would underestimate her, the way it always underestimated young black women. But he also knew Aaliyah wasn't born to shrink. By 17, she was walking the graduation stage at law school, the youngest in her class. Cameras clicked, reporters wrote headlines, but behind the celebration there lingered doubt. She's too young. She can't handle the pressure. She looks like a kid playing dress-up. Aaliyah heard it all, but she never let it sink in. Instead, she stored those doubts like fuel, saving them for the day she would prove every single voice wrong. Her first real test came sooner than anyone expected. It wasn't supposed to be her case. It landed on her desk almost by accident, a young black man, barely older than she was, accused of theft. The evidence was flimsy. The charges were exaggerated, but the tone of the prosecution was clear. They weren't trying to prove guilt. They were trying to make an example out of him. Every other attorney passed on the case. Too messy, too political, too risky. But Aaliyah saw something different. She saw a reflection of every injustice she had studied, every face she had grown up around. She saw her purpose staring back at her. "This one's mine," she told her mentor. "You're too young," he warned. "Exactly," she replied. "That's why no one will see me coming." The morning of the trial, she stood outside the courthouse steps in an oversized blazer, gripping her legal briefs tight. Around her, men and women in crisp suits strode confidently, their experience written in the lines of their faces. She looked nothing like them, and that was exactly what made her dangerous. When she entered the courtroom, whispers began immediately. "Who let the kid in? She lost? She can't be the attorney." Even her client looked at her with uncertainty at first. But Aaliyah just smiled, steady and calm. "Trust me," she whispered. "I know what I'm doing." The judge hadn't even taken the bench yet, and already the weight of bias pressed against her. But Aaliyah had been living under that weight her whole life. What she didn't know was just how far the mockery would go, and how sweet it would feel when she turned it back on those who doubted her. As the gavel struck and the judge's eyes narrowed at her, Aaliyah straightened her spine. They saw a teenager pretending to play lawyer, but she knew the truth. They weren't about to witness a girl out of place. They were about to witness a genius unleash her power. The trial began like a storm disguised as silence. Aaliyah sat at her table, small hands flipping through thick binders of evidence. The opposing counsel, a seasoned prosecutor with silver hair and a smirk carved deep into his face, leaned back in his chair with arms crossed. To him, this wasn't a case.
It was a performance.
And the highlight would be embarrassing the child who dared to stand on his stage. "Counsel," the judge said, voice heavy with skepticism, "you're representing the defense?" His tone was a challenge, not a question. Aaliyah stood, smoothed the blazer sleeves that still looked a size too big, and answered firmly, "Yes, Your Honor. Aaliyah Carter, defense attorney." Snickers rippled through the gallery. Someone coughed into their hand to hide a laugh. Even the court clerk raised an eyebrow. Aaliyah felt every eye on her, but she didn't flinch. She let them laugh, because soon they wouldn't be. The prosecutor began first, painting the accused as a criminal with no future, no ambition, no value. He exaggerated timelines, implied guilt without evidence, and spoke with the casual arrogance of someone who expected no pushback. And why wouldn't he? In his mind, the defense was a teenage girl who probably couldn't tell a cross-examination from a closing statement. But when it was Aaliyah's turn, the atmosphere shifted. She rose slowly, deliberate, the sound of her heels against the wooden floor sharper than any gavel. Her voice was clear, controlled, precise. She dissected the prosecution's timeline, pointed out inconsistencies in witness statements, and used legal precedents that even the judge blinked at. Surprised she knew them, still the resistance came like waves. The prosecutor objected constantly, smirking each time the judge upheld his challenges. The judge interrupted her arguments more than once, chastising her tone, her phrasing, even her posture. "Counsel, this isn't a classroom debate." His words stung, but Aaliyah never broke. She adjusted, redirected, and pressed forward with a focus that made even her client's shoulders begin to relax. Then came the witnesses. The first, a store clerk, swore he saw her client steal. His voice was firm, his expression smug. But Aaliyah had done her homework. She pulled out receipts, camera footage, and contradictory statements he'd given the police. Slowly, carefully, she unraveled him on the stand until his confidence cracked. "So you're saying you saw him clearly? Through 2 aisles with your back turned, and during a power outage?" she asked calmly. The gallery burst into murmurs. The judge banged his gavel for silence, but the damage was done. The witness's credibility was gone. Each new testimony she struck like a scalpel. Her questions cut deep, exposing bias, laziness, or outright lies. The prosecutor grew restless, his once smug expression tightening with each strike. He started fumbling objections, his voice rising as if he couldn't believe he was losing ground to someone half his age. But the tension wasn't just between attorneys. The judge's eyes narrowed at her more with each success. His remarks grew sharper, his patience thinner. At one point, when Aaliyah caught the prosecutor contradicting himself, she pressed forward too aggressively. The judge slammed his gavel. "Enough! You may think this is a game, young lady, but this is my courtroom. Show some respect." The words sliced through the air, humiliating and cruel. Laughter bubbled in the gallery again. For a flicker of a moment, Aaliyah's composure wavered. Her throat tightened. She thought of her mother's warning. "You don't owe the world every ounce of yourself." Maybe she had taken on too much too soon. But then she looked at her client. A young black man, eyes wide with fear but now glimmering with something else. Hope. If she quit, if she cracked, what would happen to him? The system would swallow him whole. No one else would fight. She took a breath, steadied herself, and raised her head. "With respect, Your Honor," she said evenly, her voice steady even though her hands trembled. "This isn't a game. It's a man's life, and I intend to defend it with everything the law allows me." The gallery went silent. Even the judge's gavel froze midair. For the first time, the balance of power in the room tilted. They didn't see a girl anymore. They saw a storm they hadn't prepared for, but Aaliyah knew the hardest moment was still coming. Evidence remained that could destroy everything if she didn't handle it perfectly. And both the judge and the prosecutor were waiting for her to stumble. The real battle wasn't over. It was only about to begin. The air inside the courtroom was heavy, thick with expectation. The prosecutor smiled like a wolf as he stood and announced, "The state would like to submit new evidence." A murmur swept through the gallery. Aaliyah's stomach knotted. She already knew what it was. They were pulling their last card, the grainy surveillance clip that supposedly showed her client near the scene. The judge's lips curled into something dangerously close to satisfaction. "Proceed," the video flickered on the screen. Dark, blurry footage, a hooded figure passing under a streetlight. The prosecutor pointed, triumphant. "There he is. The defendant. Same jacket, same build, same crime." His voice rose with every word. "Ladies and gentlemen, there can be no doubt." The jury leaned forward. The gallery buzzed, and Aaliyah felt the walls closing in. Her client stared at her, silent panic in his eyes. She could almost hear the thoughts screaming in his head. "We're finished." But Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had studied this video for hours. She knew its flaws, its cracks. This wasn't evidence. It was smoke and mirrors. And if she didn't expose it, her client would spend years in a cell. She rose slowly, every eye following her. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice did not. "Your Honor, I'd like permission to replay the video." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We've all seen it, counsel." "Don't waste our time." "With respect," Aaliyah pressed, "what we've seen is the surface. Let's look closer." The judge hesitated, then waved his hand. "Fine," quickly. The clip played again. Aaliyah walked toward the screen, her presence commanding, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "Notice the timestamp. 8:30 p.m. My client was working his shift across town at that exact moment. Time-stamped pay stubs prove it. Objections erupted from the prosecutor. Irrelevant. Anyone could have clocked in for him. But Aaliyah wasn't done. She froze the frame, zoomed in, pointed at the shadowy figure's shoes. "Now look here. These shoes, white with red stripes. My client has never owned them. Witnesses can testify he only wears black boots to work. Consistently, every day," the gallery gasped. The prosecutor stumbled over his words, scrambling. That doesn't mean not enough?" Aaliyah's voice grew sharper. She moved closer to the screen, highlighting a blurred reflection in a store window. "Then notice this. The figure has a tattoo on his left wrist. My client, no tattoo? The video doesn't condemn him. It frees him." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the judge's expression faltered, surprise flickering in his eyes. But then came the breaking point. The prosecutor slammed his palm on the table. "This is absurd. This child shouldn't even be in this courtroom." He turned to the judge, fury spilling out. "She's making a mockery of this trial." The word child echoed. It was meant to cut her down, to strip her of authority, to remind everyone she didn't belong. The judge's gavel banged. "Order! Order!" For a heartbeat, Aaliyah felt the weight of it crush her. The laughter, the doubt, the humiliation, it all pressed in at once. But then she remembered her client's face. She remembered the long nights of study, the sacrifices her family made, the battles she'd already survived to even sit at this table. She straightened, fire in her eyes. "I may be young," she said, voice ringing like a bell, "but I am an attorney. I passed the bar. I earned this seat. And no one, not you, not the prosecution, not anyone in this courtroom, will silence me while an innocent man's future is at stake." The words cracked through the air like lightning. The gallery froze. Even the jury leaned back, stunned. The judge, gavel suspended midair, found himself unable to speak. And for the first time, the balance of the entire trial shifted. No longer was she a teenager pretending at power. She was the storm, the reckoning, the truth given voice. The prosecutor's smirk was gone. The judge's mocking tone was silenced, and her client sat straighter, his eyes filled with something he hadn't dared feel until now. Hope. The climax had struck. But the verdict still hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat. Aaliyah sat perfectly still, her client beside her, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. The judge looked down with that same mix of irritation and condescension, but there was something else now, too. Unease. He could feel the shift in the room, even if he wouldn't admit it. The foreman stood, paper trembling in his hands. We, the jury, find the defendant. He paused, the pause stretching like a rope pulled taut. Not guilty. Gasps filled the chamber. Relief surged through Alia's chest, nearly knocking the breath out of her. Her client buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking, and for the first time since this nightmare began, tears fell not from fear, but from freedom. The gallery erupted. Some applauded. Some muttered under their breath, angry that a kid had beaten the system. The prosecutor sat frozen, his face pale, his arrogance stripped away. The judge banged his gavel furiously. "Order! Order in this court!" But the sound was hollow now. Authority no longer carried the same weight. As the crowd began to disperse, Alia gathered her files. Her hands still shook, but now from adrenaline, from triumph. The judge leaned forward, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You may have won today, Miss Carter, but this system will chew you up. You'll learn that." Alia looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Or maybe," she said quietly, "this system will learn to change." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. "Miss Carter, how old are you? How did you pull this off? What's next?" Questions flew like arrows, but she didn't stop for them. She walked beside her client, who was now free, his mother clinging to him with sobs of gratitude. That was the only recognition that mattered. Word of the case spread quickly. Headlines ran the next morning. Teen-looking attorney stuns court. Wins case against all odds. Social media lit up with her name. Some praising her genius, others mocking her youth. Still others furious that a black woman had stolen the spotlight in a system never meant for her. But Alia didn't chase the noise. She went back to her office, small, cluttered, more dream than reality, and kept working. Because she knew this wasn't the end. For every victory, there would be another battle, another judge who doubted her, another prosecutor who dismissed her, another client who needed her to stand firm when the world tried to crush them. Her victory carried ripples beyond the courtroom. Other young law students of color reached out, inspired. Parents told their children her story at dinner tables, proof that brilliance could not be boxed in by prejudice. And even those who mocked her couldn't ignore the fact. She had faced down a hostile courtroom and won. The lesson was clear. Racism and prejudice might sneer, laugh, and try to tear down, but courage and truth could dismantle even the tallest walls. Alia had walked into a place designed to silence her and turned it into a stage for justice. As she stood by the courthouse steps later that evening, the sun setting behind her, she felt the weight of what had happened. Not just the verdict, not just the headlines, but the truth that echoed louder than the gavel had ever sounded. Racism destroys families. Prejudice weakens communities, but unity, resilience, and courage, those are the forces that bend history. And Alia Carter, once mocked as a child in a courtroom, had become proof of it.